Welcome to the New Monastics podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics podcast. I'm Netanel, co-founder of Charis Foundation and dialogue partner for our guests.
And I'm Daniel, the host for the show.
Today, we've invited my friend and colleague, Rabbi Tirzah Firestone, a fellow student of Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shalomi, an author and psychotherapist focusing on intergenerational trauma, and one of the senior rabbis of the Jewish Renewal Movement. Tirzah is the author of Wounds into Wisdom, Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma, and The Receiving, Reclaiming Jewish Women's Wisdom.
Hi, Tirzah. It's so lovely to have you on.
Good morning. Wonderful to be here.
Yes, good morning. Again, sorry we had all the technical difficulties, so listeners can expect a little bit of a shorter show. We're running into a little bit of a time crunch, but just so nice to have you on. And we wanted to jump a little bit all over the place. I think we'll see where we go. But to begin, I know your most current work has been around intergenerational trauma in the Jewish community. And I just wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about that work with us.
Yeah, the work is big and endless,
Yes.
particularly because of where we sit today in 2025 and the unfoldings of events on the ground. But certainly, it was a surprise 5 years ago when my book came out, Wounds into Wisdom, how it landed not only in the Jewish community, but also in the international community, the interest and the fascination and the sort of the relevance, the poignancy of looking through a lens that's wider, that's broader, to see where we stand in the context of our ancestors, that we're not here in a vacuum. We're not here as solo acts. We are here as the current blossom on a tree that is ancient, that is thousands of years old, each one of us. Our culture tells us we're individuals. There's all of the move toward individuation, which is also very, very important. Certainly as a Jungian student, I'm very, very connected to that idea of individuation. And at the same time, how do we fit into the context of ancestral patterns that have brought us to this day?
Yeah, beautifully said.
One of the things I was wondering, Tirzah, is right now, wherever you look, you see the word trauma. Every article, every book, the titles of so many books. And when that starts happening, I start to wonder, where is the there? When it becomes such accepted discourse that you can lose the work.
That's right.
In the using of the words. And so I think it's a moment where I think we need to reorient to what's important about the use of this word, how we use it. Where's the there right now?
Good. That's so important. It has been so popularized and so freighted and trashed and exploited, all of that. Yeah. And that's true with every important word. I think it's important to remember that it's coming in a context in which there's been an explosion of popularized science, studies that are bona fide research that has come out of clinical research that has hit the populace in a way that everyone goes, yes, I know about that. I know what it means and what it feels like to have my nervous system overwhelmed and unable to cope with what's coming in. Resma Menachem, my dear colleague, says trauma is anything that hits the body too much, too soon, too fast, and I'm unable to assimilate. I'm unable to integrate it. It's simply, the word itself is simply Greek for wound. But because of all the neuroscience and then following on the heels of neuroscience studies, the epigenetic studies that are coming out from animal behavior labs and long-term studies in human sociological labs, it has become popularized. And so you have kids coming out of the movie theaters. That was so traumatic. So
Yeah.
we're using the word, but it is really important to also to see it as an expression of how human experience is rolling, which is we are overwhelmed. We read the paper and it's overwhelming. And what do? We know from neuroscience, from fMRIs, that when we are overwhelmed, we do certain things. We dissociate, we move into hyperarousal, we go into isolation. All of these are hallmark characteristics of trauma that people identify with. So there is that too. There's always hand in glove. With any important concept, with any important archetype, there's both the light and the shadow.
I remember there's a wonderful interview with Jung where I think the birth trauma is brought up to him. And Jung points out that, with something that every human experiences, then you can't speak of a trauma exactly. And I wonder, do we need to back up and talk about impacts, even significant impacts? And then trauma tends to have a particular pathology, a certain kind of characteristic, a sequencing of cascading failures in your system that you experience when something is touched upon. And so I thought that was interesting about this point about how often you're hearing this word. Everything is being called a trauma when there are things that humans just basically experience, and we have impacts around them. And so it reminds me in The Lament of the Dead with James Hillman and Sonosham Dasani, they're in dialogue in that book, and they start questioning, why is psychotherapy becoming less useful, less impactful? And some of it was about, the language of society has become over-psychologized. And so everybody is absorbing all the terms and they get inoculated against it.
Yeah. It's like cheapened. Everything becomes cheaper. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see what I'm getting at? Like the birth trauma, everybody experiences that. Are we opting ourselves out of help?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that this takes us to a very important phenomenon, which is a recurrent phenomenon. I'm sure it's cyclical. Of course it is, looking at Jewish history, where things have become so cerebral, so conceptual, so abstract, that we're talking about life, we're talking about things rather than experiencing them.
Yeah.
And we're craving direct spiritual experience. We're craving touching, we're craving the I thou, we're craving the look, the glance, something that's brought forth in poetry and in mystical experience and in psychedelic use, because we're sick and tired of all the words that we're flooded with, the barrage of information.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, psychotherapy, which is just from the neck and up, we're just talking about things. No, it's becoming nauseating amongst many of us who are searching for that direct revelatory moment.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of this all, is there something positive about the way in which a word like trauma has become popularized? And can it help people get in touch with feelings and experiences that they maybe otherwise wouldn't have a category for? And that the lens of trauma can be really helpful for people to understand some of their patterning and acknowledging some of the patterns also in their family and family history. And then when we're talking about intergenerational trauma, down a long line.
Absolutely. I think it helps us empathize that what is going on in various parts of the world are completely overwhelming. It also helps us to empathize in my work on ancestral healing, to not negate our ancestors, but to see them in the context of what were they living through, the Great Depression or World War I. Then my grandfather was in the trenches in the war or in the Dresden bombing, or what must that have felt like? It helps us to expand our own experience, helps us expand our conceptual lens into something that could be more empathic and seeing things, feeling things more, having compassion for our parents. and the limitations of how they were raised and how their parents raised them and how their parents raised them. When we do genograms, when we look at the socio-political context of, wow, what they were going through, that starts to really shake up just discarding or dismissing them as sort of our benighted family members. Yeah.
Yeah. You're just back from Germany, right?
I am just back from Germany, yes.
And did that contextualize more your father's experience?
Fathers and mothers. I was invited to Berlin for a week of lectures coinciding with the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. That day, January 27th, is a day that is memorialized in Germany. It is sort of a national Memorial Day. I wouldn't say a holiday, but a national Memorial Day, along with, I think it's May 8th, which is the end of the war, the Hitler's death. They have a memory culture in Germany where they do certain things to enact consciousness, a cognizance of the criminality that happened in the Third Reich and in the Nazi regime under Hitler. So, yeah, so powerful to be back. My mother was German. She escaped in 1939, but lost scores and scores of family members. My father was stationed in Germany at the liberation of another death camp, Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, that's what I was remembering.
Yeah, in 1945, also 80th anniversary. So this year in 2025, we're going to have a lot of anniversaries coming up here all through the year. The end of the war and what does it mean in the context of the rise of the AfD in Germany, which is they don't call it a fascist party, but certainly it's using a lot of the Nazi slogans, a lot of the Nazi logos and policy statements. We've just had the German elections this week, and going to Germany in the anniversary year, the 80th anniversary, which is 8 decades since all this stuff transpired, was very, very powerful, especially in the context of the rise, again, of an extreme right wing that is touting some of the very same things. And certainly we see that here in the U.S. as well.
Things are allowed to arise right now, which would have been unheard of 30 years ago. And I start to wonder if it's because it's starting to go out of living memory. And so things become rallying points that were just unthinkable before. And so when we lose the living memory, then history becomes a tool again of propaganda. It feels something like that.
Absolutely. I think that's true. And I think that that's true of everything. When it becomes just a concept that can be used as such, exploited, weaponized, and it is so interesting how things get twisted. And even the extreme right is using some of the tools of the criminal past as a weapon to move forward. Anything can be misused, anything and everything.
Yeah.
Back in, I think it was 2016 or 2017, we were talking on the phone. I was living in New York at the time, and we were talking about your book as a perspective book.
Yeah.
And we were kind of going over an outline of the chapters, and you'd sent me some early material. And I thought, wow, this is a brave book. And we were talking about how careful you had to be with handling this material, even in that moment. And then the book came out. It was significant. It was received well. And it was part of a moment. People are recognizing not only trauma, but intergenerational trauma. And you were looking at impacts in the Jewish world. And now, given the things that have happened recently, it seems still more significant and yet almost harder to discuss.
That's right.
How has this arc changed over the last 5 years for you?
Thank you for asking that. It's been so profound. I've been teaching people all over the world, but in the Jewish community, particularly, you can't see the forest for the trees, in a sense, right? With the events beginning, before October 7th, but certainly October 7th, which stimulated, I think, historical trauma in many, many people, Jews and non-Jews, but certainly Jews around the world. the activation of those old unhealed themes that the world is unsafe, we are unsafe, we do not belong, we're always the victim, we're always the righteous victim, the tropes that got re-stimulated. And so easy to fall back into thinking that is not actually true. So to think of Jews as powerless victims, well, actually, Israel is a nuclear power right now, backed by the great superpowers of the world. It's not actually true, but our unhealed history within us would have us believe it feels like that again, because a band of terrorists did some unthinkable, brutal and savage things on October 7th. And so it flips us into this gestalt of experience. And then there's all of these, like I said, there are these trauma responses, dissociation, we get numb to it, or we go into this hyperactivity, this hyper arousal, hyper reactivity, hyper vigilance, and there is a kind of knee jerk, a hair trigger. So that happens in our personal nervous systems, so that we're hyper aroused and we can't sleep. We have dreams, we have PTSD experiences of flashbacks and all kinds of historical trauma that happens in the bodies of individuals, but also we see it knee-jerking on the world stage as well, in policy, in military strategy, in the inability to see the other because we're under existential threat. So we're not going to be thinking about the other. We're trying to save our lives and we're trying to survive. And period. And that becomes 1, 2, 3, 4 on the list of priorities. Nothing else matters. And so anything goes, and it gives a kind of lethal permission to do anything. Everything is moral when you're the righteous victim. Everything, every action and reaction becomes possible and legal, and no one can say a thing about that.
Yeah. I mean, if we go back, say, 3 years ago, and you're in the middle of doing new workshops on these things, what's changed between then and now in talking about these things? Did it feel more effective then?
I thought, I had my hopes that a world that could see through a broader lens with the science, with the new data, could see, we are in this huge hyperreactivity and we need to step back and find another part of our brain. So we're not reacting from the emotional brain, from limbic lava is what I call it. Kind of explosiveness is very, very different than the part of the brain that can say, oh, wow, we are activated. We are dysregulated. We have to sit back and get help. We need to cool down before we act, before we create a strategy of response. But alas, we are animals, and it didn't happen. I don't think that, very unfortunately, I don't think we're healed enough. And there's a lot of war on the planet. There's a lot of power over, there's a lot of domination, there's a lot of killing, there's not that empathy that we were talking about. That could be the result of what Daniel was saying, could be the result of greater understanding. Tragic times.
Yeah. Of course, you're not only a psychotherapist, you're also a rabbi. And there's, a psychotherapeutic perspective. And then as a spiritual leader, there's a lot of crossover in your audience. And when does the rabbi respond? And when does the psychotherapist respond? How do you hold the dual roles in having these conversations? Because these conversations are in the Jewish community. And the Jewish community is in an interesting moment, and it's been in it for a long time, actually, between an identity that was based in Judaism and now a strong ethnic identity, often without the Judaism, and they're strangely conflated,
Yes, they really are. That's part of the problem.
For some people, Judaism is Jewish identity. So
when did the Jewish identity become conflated with Jewish nationalism?
Exactly.
And I hesitate to use the Z word. I'm not going to even go there, because for me that word was actually a mystical, spiritual word, and it has been like the word trauma, has been exploited and freighted and weaponized in the most horrific ways. But many people feel that their Judaism is a source of ethicality and a way to connect with God, a way to connect with deep inner guidance. And they don't want it to be associated with nationalism, with Jewish nationalism. They don't sort of subscribe to that use of their Judaism and don't want to be equated or associated with it. And I respect that. I think Judaism is a venerable, ancient, mystical tradition. And it's one that I personally feel is a way to open the channels. It's a means to open the channels to the divine powers and the unseen worlds. You know, the power of the Hebrew letters, the power of the Hebrew God names, the Torah, the songs, all of that is so important to me. But it has become, very unfortunately, tainted with the very recent 75-year-old, 77-year-old project of Jewish nationalism, which is now in big crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking at Passover. My last Passover was with you at your home, with you and David.
Yeah.
And I was telling you how so many people were asking me, what would Reb Zalman say? Our common teacher and our beloved teacher. And I was responding to them that it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
I could hear what they wanted was a kind of fiat to justify whatever side they were on. They wanted him to be on that side, and they wanted to hear something that would justify that. But he was not a man of sides.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's not his time anymore. It's our time. It matters what we say and do. And that was just such an interesting thing, that search for authority.
Yeah. I love the answer you gave. And we talked about it again at his gravesite, I think, at his yard site.
That's right. Yeah.
That it's not ours to turn, although, seeking the guidance and the blessings and the strength of the ancestors right now is extremely important to many people, and it is to me.
Mm-hmm.
I come into Reb Zalman's presence frequently in my meditations, but I totally agree with you, Netanel, that that's not his time. He has turned over the baton, so to speak, to us, to our moral sense, to our moral leadership, to our moral imagination. And what are we saying about this time? Is this time a Jewish time? Are the facts on the ground? Are these decisions that feel equatable with what we know are in our ethical teachings? We have to make that decision.
Yeah. We can't cede the struggle to the authority of the past. We have to wrestle with it. But when I look to his example was not a man of sides.
That's right.
And I think that's important for us too. It's important to stand on a side, but not to think in terms of us and them. There's one body.
Well said. And Reb Zalman would make the rounds to every community.
Yes.
He was the Rebbe of the entire community. He would, no matter the politics, no matter the style, he would show respect and he would show up. He would sit in the back row of every congregation at churches, mosques, and every synagogue, certainly.
Some of the stuff that I've encountered of Reb Zalman is also him being very frustrated with fundamentalists on both sides. And what he was really seeking, it seemed oftentimes, was who are the people I can really talk to? Who are the people I can really pray with across political and cultural divides, and really seemed to be somebody who didn't necessarily believe in a strictly political solution. It seemed like for him, the realm of the spirit and of the heart was so real and so serious that any kind of real peacekeeping or peacemaking activity had to involve God. We had to bring God not only into the conversation, but into the felt presence to allow for deep empathy, allow for a real conversation. And when I'm hearing you speak, Tirzah, about these kind of trauma responses that seems to almost negate the possibility of a true encounter in the way that Reb Zalman was seeking. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix and see how that played.
Thank you. I love what you just said, Daniel, and said so beautifully. Reb Zalman was in the presence always of the living God, and he sought that in every corner. And I think he was so happy, whether he was davening with Native Americans or with Muslims. That's what he was seeking, that kiss point, that living immediacy of the God presence. And that is radically political and completely apolitical. It brings everything right to the moment. It includes everything. It doesn't negate anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think Daniel's right. I remember a meeting of Jewish renewal leaders, and it was mostly administrative leaders, so within the movement, and they were talking about a political issue that had come up in the Jewish renewal community and what to do about it. And there were a lot of strategies. And this was right after Reb Zalman had passed, and it was happening at the table here in his former house. And I was there, and his wife Eve was there. And they said, "What do we do about this?" And all the strategies had been laid out. And Eve very wisely said what Reb Zalman might have said: "Have you prayed about it?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was abundantly clear that they had not. But as Reb Zalman's students, if we're not praying about it, if we're not seeding the God field, as he used to say, with our intentions for peace and searching, struggling for answers in prayer, there's something missing.
That's beautiful. I love seed, not seed, SEED, not CEDE.
Yeah.
Really to seed it and, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, water those seeds. What are we watering? And I think it's so important. Somehow Thich Nhat Hanh wants to kind of elbow a little space in right now to say that, and they loved each other. I think there's so many seeds here from our ancestors, let's just say from the past generations, since we were mentioning the ancestral resonances and the ancestral past that's upon us, that's acting itself out. Thich Nhat Hanh says the ancestors planted all kinds of seeds within us. Some of them are nefarious. Some of them are toxic. He didn't use that word, of course, but I am. And some of them are the deepest, most nourishing and fertilizing of our lives. And we have to make sure that we're watering the right seeds that our ancestors bequeathed to us and leaving the others to go fallow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that really brings me to where I hoped we would get to in terms of what does it mean for somebody who's a spiritual practitioner walking a spiritual path to work not only with intergenerational trauma, but work with these seeds as you're talking about. And I'm hearing you name kind of intergenerational trauma as maybe one of kind of seed, as those kinds of toxic, nefarious seeds that can grow from wounds, but then also working with the beauty and strength and grace of our ancestors. What does it mean to really reckon with our entire inheritance and not disown the negative sides of that, and to also not disown the positive sides of that, but to have an honest kind of encounter with that? And how might working with the kind of heavy material of intergenerational trauma be potentially transformative for oneself, or what kind of insights might it bring that quote unquote spiritual practice, kind of prayer, meditation might not bring, kind of bringing in that kind of deep psychological work into one's path?
Can I quote you?
Sure.
What you just said, Daniel, is I think the essence of the power of ancestral healing. That is the essence of it, is to look with honest inquiry, with real awareness into what has been bequeathed to us, who our ancestors were, where they came from, and to look at everything, their spiritual context, their socio-political context, their financial and economic facts of their lives, and see the kinds of patterns and tropes and mantras that came down to us. I mean, literally the mantras that play in our head that tell us that we are safe, that we'll be okay or not, that the world is out against us, that we're going to be screwed, or we have something divine that has been given to us. All of these tropes are given to us, sometimes contradictory, very contradictory scripts have been given to us, and to look what is in the field and see what we want to harvest. And the truth is, none of us would be here if our ancestors hadn't survived.
Of course, yeah.
They survived. They survived great hardship, and they maybe even prayed for a generation like ours, where we have relative peace and fruitfulness and prosperity and the ability to grow and cultivate our talents and all the great things that we have in our lives. So to water those brilliant and hopeful seeds of resilience and wisdom, and the ones that are knee-jerking and violent and would have us live scarcity, to understand those and be compassionate toward them, but not to cultivate them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it seems that the generations that have a little bit more comfort space are really the ones that have the ability to reckon with the trauma. When people are in kind of dire circumstances, people are in it, they're surviving.
That's right.
And then with space, the kind of reckoning, the trauma kind of bubbles up to the surface in a more present way. Like, we can actually recognize it because we're not just in fight or flight.
That's right.
And so it seems like in that way, we have to do some of the work that our ancestors couldn't do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Tirzah, we had a shorter amount of time today. And as we come in for a landing, again, an expression Reb Zalman used to use a lot, we usually end an episode with a poem or a prayer or a kavanah. And in your function as rabbi, what is the prayer that we need today for this moment?
Well, I just was studying a passage from Zohar yesterday that is coming to mind right now. And it has to do with what happens when the world goes awry and how could we bring it back together. The rabbis used, the sages, the mystics used the image of inside the Holy of Holies on the ark were two golden forms. Mm-hmm. And they were two kruvim cherubs, or angels with outstretched wings that flew up and touched each other. But they were two separate beings. The mystics taught that they were masculine and feminine. Now, we're not talking about gender, we're talking about energies, right? Mm-hmm. In a Jungian sense, in an archetypal sense, the energy of the masculine, the more I see what is out there and I'm going to get it, more of an arrow energy, a linear goal-oriented energy, and the feminine principle being more about relationship, being more meandering, being more a water, being more relational and receptive. These two need each other. And the mystics talked about, and this is even in Talmud, not only in Zohar, that the world goes awry when these two angels are not facing each other and looking at each other. Their wings are not kissing. That sometimes when our relationships here on earth, we turn away from each other, we don't look each other in the eye, our relationships get freighted and fraught with enmity. We don't clear our shit, basically. We don't clean our karma. The angels at the center of the universe, the angels at the center of the Holy of Holies, at the center of our psyches, turn away from each other. The masculine, feminine principles are not in balance. Everything gets like nails on a chalkboard, and that's when the world starts to go awry. So I can end with a chant, which is coming to mind, but I just wanted to say that within each one of us, there's this beautiful image. We can think about this image at the center of our heart, where there are these energies that want to face each other. They want to be in love. And when we can face our friends, even when stuff comes up, I don't agree with your politics, you don't agree with mine, blah, blah. But if I can say, let's go out to lunch anyway. I want to love you even when we don't see eye to eye, but I want to recommit to the I, thou. I want to recommit to the river of humanity that flows between us. I want to look you in the eye and tell you you're my sister, you're my brother. then the angels face each other again. And there are ripples of peace that can come out of that place. So I'm just sharing that beautiful image, which is so important. That's the God space. That's where the high priest or priestess goes, puts her head between those wings in the Holy of Holies to receive the prophecy. That can't happen. We can't hear the voice of spirit when we're not in harmony with each other here on earth. And so it's just a great reminder to clean up our shit, even on the smallest level. Oh, I don't talk to that person anymore, and I don't like their politics, etc. But no, just clean it up. Okay, let's see. So we'll close with a chant.
Beautiful.
The chant that's coming to mind is actually not a Hebrew chant. It's not a Jewish chant. It's a chant that I teach because it matters. It goes like this. Holy, we are holy. We are God in disguise. We are holy. Holy, we are holy. We are God in disguise. We are holy.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Blessings to everybody.
Shout out to friend of the show, Tree Fort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.